Good morning. I was going to say please be seated, but everyone knows what to do here. Well done. I'm going to move this forward a bit because I'm not that tall. Very good, and I feel more comfortable if I can see things. So, take my mask off too. When I was in Cambodia and we had to preach, I had a mask on, I had my glasses on, I had the over-the-ear mic as well, so trying to untangle everything when you're getting up was always a nightmare. We're relying on technology this morning too, so I'm hoping technology plays ball. I'm going to test it and see if it works. Hey, look at that. Very good. It's always good when technology works, isn't it? By the way, very good morning to you all. It's actually really, really lovely to be here and a real privilege to be here. My family and I, we came here, I think about 4 years ago, just before we left. I'm not sure how many of you were here. It's much harder to tell who is who with masks on, unfortunately. If you've greeted me in the past and I look at you blankly, I'm so sorry. Having masks and everything else, and at my age, you tend to forget things a bit easier. But it is really, really lovely to be here. And we do really, really appreciate just the fellowship we have in Christ with St. Christopher's. And I do want to thank you too on behalf of Anne and Anthony, who St. Christopher's faithfully have supported for so long. Anne and Anthony McCormick were faithful missionaries with the NZCMS, New Zealand Church Missionary Society, in Cambodia too. And we have known them both for a very long time, and we're so incredibly saddened to hear when Anthony passed away, as you all must have been too as a church who support them well. But we love having this connection. We love that St. Christopher's has a Cambodian connection too that can be continued through us, and it is a real privilege to be here. I thought what I'd do this morning, so some of you probably know us very well through different sources, and some people probably don't know us at all. Some probably know Cambodia very well, and other people don't know it at all. So I thought what I'd do this morning is just give a very brief outline on Cambodia, and then give a brief outline on what we've been doing for the last 3 years, just to give you a better connection with us, so for the future we can go into things a bit deeper. We've been in Cambodia now for 3.5 years with my family. We live in the city of Phnom Penh. It's the capital city of Cambodia. It's about 3.5 million people. It's the largest city by far in Cambodia. The second biggest is about 100,000 people. So most of the main centre of Cambodia is in Phnom Penh, where we live. We've been there for 3.5 years, like I said. Cambodia, Phnom Penh especially, it's a city of motorbikes. If you're going around, you're generally going on motorbikes or in tuk-tuks. And it's the sort of city where you'll see anyone carrying anything on a motorbike. On the far left, you've got someone carrying a pane of glass on the motorbike. I don't know how they get to their location holding a pane of glass. You can see on the top right, someone's carrying a coffin on the back of their motorbike. We assume it was empty, but honestly, you can never tell in Cambodia. And then the bottom right, obviously, someone's carrying everything on the back of a bike. These sort of things are common to see in Cambodia. It's a very sort of different lifestyle. It's also a very poor country. It's one of the poorest countries in the world. But on the flip side, it's also has a lot of wealth there as well. It's a very odd dynamic. I think I've seen more luxury sports cars in Cambodia than I have in New Zealand or Australia. You'll be on an old street and suddenly a Lamborghini or a Ferrari will go past you, followed by a tuk-tuk, followed by a man driving an old bicycle. So it's a very, very odd situation to be in. And it's odd for the country as well, having this extreme poor and extreme wealth right next to each other. And it's important to know a little bit about the history of Cambodia in order to understand why it's gotten to be like this. And also knowing a little bit of the history of Cambodia helps to understand what we're doing there and why we think it's so important. One of Cambodia's neighbours is Vietnam. If you know where Cambodia is, it's got Vietnam on one side, Thailand on the other side. About the Vietnam War era, so 45 years, 50 years ago, Cambodia got into a bit of trouble with America. America thought that Cambodians were harbouring Vietnamese during the Vietnamese conflict. And so America started to bomb Cambodia quite heavily. There's a picture of Richard Nixon pointing to places they were bombing or had suspected people hiding there. They think that more bombs were dropped on Cambodia by America during this time than in the whole of World War II combined, American dropping bombs. So it was intensely bombed. Also, America put in the puppet government into Cambodia. The leader of Cambodia at the time was very pro-American. And all of these sort of things caused the country to be very resentful about foreign influence coming into their country. The Americans coming in through bombing, people looking to take over the country through first news. And so it caused a lot of anti-American sentiment, and in terms it led to the rise of a man called Pol Pot in the Khmer Rouge. Now, some of you probably know very well about it. I was just born at this time, so my memory is terrible about it, so I knew nothing about this until we started to look into going to Cambodia effectively. But I'm sure some of you will remember it being in the news. I'm always interested to know how much was in the news, because often it was overlooked in world affairs at the time, the things that were going on in Cambodia. But what they essentially did in Cambodia, they were sick of all these outside influences, and so they said, right, we're going to go back to day one, pure Cambodians on our own. And so what they decided to do was they kicked everyone out of the city. They had a mass migration out of the city. They thought the city was tainted by foreign sources and foreign input, so they kicked every single person out of the city. Literally every single person was kicked out of the cities and forced to go and work in farms. They thought they'd go back to their glory days as a country and have everyone working industriously on the farms. However, no one knew how to work on the farms. They just kicked them off, told them to go and farm without telling them how to farm. And so it was absolutely terrible what happened. There was famine, there was drought, there was sickness, there was intense amount of suffering and death amongst the people. And not only that, the Khmer Rouge regime at the time saw anyone who was a threat to them or anyone who represented an outside source as the enemy. So anyone who was in government, anyone who was educated, anyone who was religious, anyone who was spiritual, not just Christians, it was Buddhists as well, anyone who represented a threat to this new ideology was killed. If you wore glasses, you were probably killed because you were seen as educated. It was an incredibly intense and terrible time for the country. They think about, from a population of 6 million people at the time, about 2 million people were killed during this time. It's hard to grasp those numbers. It's similar to New Zealand at the moment, isn't it, in terms of numbers? We're about 6 million people in New Zealand. Imagine 2 million people being killed through all this. It was terrible, and it's had a massive, massive effect on the country. It was massive in one way because it was Cambodians killing Cambodians. It wasn't along religious lines, it wasn't along tribal lines or cultural lines. It was Cambodians literally killing their neighbours, Cambodians killing their family members just because they needed to survive. We can't understand that. We can't grasp how difficult that is for them as a country. What's meant for them is basically left them a complete whole country of people suffering from PTSD. The parents who lived through it have passed on their all the suffering and angst that they felt during it. They've passed it on to the children. And so there's a lot of built-up repression and suffering and torment in their lives through this. We've talked to people over there, Cambodians, who say we are less trusting as a people now because of this. We look out for number one now. We can't trust anyone else to look after us, so we're looking out for ourselves. It's also, you see it flare up. People often don't express their emotions because they're very keen to keep their thoughts hidden. But what that means is when they do express their emotions, it's often far overboard from what should be. We often see reports of husbands killing wives, wives killing husbands just for small disputes at home. I had a friend who went for a ride in a tuk-tuk, and he had an argument with the tuk-tuk driver afterwards about how much the fare should be. And so during the argument, the tuk-tuk driver reached into the back of the tuk-tuk and pulled out a machete and chased him down the road. It wasn't just a small argument at the stage, it's life and death, just over a disagreement about money of a tuk-tuk ride. So it's affected the country incredibly. It's caused them to have leadership, which isn't the best. It's caused them to be overly reliant on foreign money, just looking out for whatever they can do to survive. There's a couple of films which look about the Khmer Rouge and that time history. If you're not fully aware of what was going on, there's a couple of good films. First, Killing Fields, a very old one from the 80s, came out just after events started surfacing from here. And then a recent one, First They Killed My Father. They're both very good films talking about the events of the time. The First They Killed My Father is from a child's perspective, so it's very different. It doesn't analyse things, it just gets what was going on, raw details. It's meant that there's no democracy in the country. They've had one leader there for 35 years. It's a democracy, but one leader for 35 years, and he has chosen his successor, which is his son. So it's not really a democracy. There's no opposition party. There's no leadership in all areas. At the time, like I said, they killed anyone who was educated, anyone who might have been a threat. And so the nation lost all its leaders. They lost all leaders in religion, in education, in medicine. Everyone was killed. And so there's this lack of internal leadership and therefore a reliance on external people to come in and tell them what to do, which it's not good for them as a country, I don't think. Also, as a national identity, who are we as a people is very difficult. Again, like I said, it was Cambodians killing Cambodians, and they're forced to ask on a daily basis, who are we as a people? I know some people, after the conflict happened, some of the Khmer Rouge leaders went back to live in the villages that they lived in before, and they lived next to people that they've killed their family members of. And people were asked, well, how can you live with these people who have killed your family members? And they say, well, I might have done just the same thing if I was in their situation. In order to survive, I might have dobbed in my family. I might have done this to survive. So it's very hard to understand as a culture how they can be dealing with this on a day-to-day basis and what it takes to get through it. We heard 2 Bible passages this morning which I think are really relevant for the situation, relevant for Cambodia, and relevant for why we're there. The first one from Matthew 11, I'll just read the 2 verses up there. It says, Jesus says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." See, the Cambodian people need to know about Jesus and the hope and the joy and the rest that they can find in him. And then the second verse ties into that, of course. How then can they call on the one they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one of whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can anyone preach unless they are sent? So my family, we believe firmly that Cambodia needs Jesus. And therefore they need someone sent to them who will tell them about Jesus. And so our main reason for being in the country is to be telling Cambodians about the hope they can find in Jesus. It's the reason we're there. I thought briefly, now sorry if I'm going to talk too long, throw something at me, Michael, if I'm waffling on for too long, and I'll stop. So I just appreciate how patient you are. What I'm going to do is just briefly share what we've been doing over the last 3 years, just so you can get an idea for us. But I do think it's so important to understand the history of Cambodia in order to understand the needs of the people there. That we're not going into this empty vacuum. There is this huge need, not just financially, but for their souls. So my family and I, we've been there for the last 3 years. I mentioned before, so we've been living in Cambodia with all the joys that Cambodia has through flooding, through tuk-tuk rides, and everything like that. Our first year was language learning and culture learning. If you've ever done language learning, it's very, very odd. Language is a strange thing to learn. Sometimes you're fantastic at it, and other times you think you've learned nothing. Sometimes you can talk to someone and understand them perfectly, and they can understand you, and other times you can't even say your name. And we've experienced the ups and downs of learning language. However, we think it's vital to learn the language. To be able to speak to Cambodian people in their heart language is crucial in being able to tell them about Jesus. So we think it's worthwhile, and when we go back, we're going to keep learning the language. I've got a friend who lectures at the Bible college over there, and he's been there for 21 years, and he says he's still learning the language. So it's going to be an ongoing thing. I'm still learning English. I'll read English words that I struggle with sometimes when I'm reading a book. So learning a new language, it's going to be a lifelong thing for us. Part of what we do is we're involved with the Anglican church over there too. We're in a nice brand new building over there, actually. It's very odd. It's a 6-story building which is financed by the Singapore diocese. So Cambodia comes under the Singapore diocese because it's not a very big church itself. So we've got a lovely new building there, which is very, very odd in the middle of Phnom Penh. But we've got a Khmer congregation over there. It's the local people congregation. And we also have an expat congregation. The expat congregation, it's odd because I think annually it's about a 60 or 70% turnover of people. So very odd trying to do church when, over half the people in church leave every year. Very weird. But it's a lovely group of people, and we love the leadership of the church, and people who go to the church have a real heart for God. So it's lovely being amongst them. So our role was to serve in whatever way possible. However, at the start of 2020, COVID hit, and that kind of messed up a lot of plans for the country. It meant that everything went online. Our children had been doing online schooling for 2 years. They had been at a lovely school, but because of COVID, had to do online school for 2 years up until we came back here. We've been doing church online for 2 years. I think people in Christchurch, New Zealand, have had a taste of online church services, and no one likes it. You might like not having to dress up in your Sunday best, or you might like having a coffee with you, but it's not ideal for church, is it? It's much better being together with people doing church. We had intense lockdowns in Cambodia. The army was out in the street for a lot of the time, and for a Southeast Asian country, which is normally quite bustling at night time, it went down to empty streets. It's never been like this before. It was incredibly odd for the country. And it also meant a lot of shops had to close down too. And so people who would normally sell stuff at market just had to sell stuff wherever they could find a space on the side of the road. So you've got people selling meat there on the side of the road or out of the back of their motorbike. A lot of people, though, their shops had to close down, and a lot of people moved out of Phnom Penh and went into the province to spend time with their family and to work on the family farm. So it was very odd. Phnom Penh was shut down for a long time. It was weird, the things that were open, though. The malls were open for some reason. Everything else pretty much was closed, but the malls were open. I don't know why. Well, so that a bit of money can come in. But it was very odd. They closed the library down, the museum down. No one goes to the museum. But they left the malls open. A lot of people go to the mall. It was very odd. We found they often did things just for the appearance of doing things, just to make it look like they were doing something about COVID. Like I said, the military was patrolling the streets, and the military got issued their police issue batons that they could whack people who were getting out of line, who were outside out of curfew. So they actually had a big truck full of these special length sticks, police issued sticks that they could whack people with. And the governor of Phnom Penh said it was like a parent disciplining their wayward children. So if they saw people out on the street, they'd say, go home and give them a whack. And that was seen quite normal. School was this for 2 years. We had all three of our kids doing school on the computers at home. Very odd. Emily, our youngest, she was 5 when this was going on. So you can imagine learning how to read and write while this is your schooling. So very, very odd times for them. But they coped really well. They had their meetings, their Zoom meetings, like most of us know how to do. And the teachers at the school were wonderful in catering to the needs of the kids. And in working out how to do things as school. Everyone was working out how to do things at this time. It was odd. Sometimes we were allowed back to church. We could go back to church sporadically with great restrictions on us. We were only allowed to have 30-minute church services. The sermon was only allowed to be 7 minutes long. Is that long enough, Michael? No, maybe. Some people sad about that, some people happy. But yeah, so we had to wear masks the whole time, social distancing, the works. Children were not allowed back to start with too, which was a real sadness. And it was an odd way to do church too. But again, the odd thing was, as soon as church finished, everyone went outside, took off their masks and talked. So it was odd times you're living under. But this was very, very brief. With the Khmer service too, very, very brief periods where you're allowed back to church. But a lot of people had gone away, so it was a very difficult way to do church. And then for the majority of the time, it was church online. People would go down, record the service, and then put that out on Facebook on the Sunday morning. I had to do preaching to my phone. It was, it's not nice preaching to a phone. You feel very self-conscious, even though you're talking to no one and you can't see anyone. So it was very, very odd times. Other ministry areas I had been involved in, there was an English conversational group that the church ran where we were going and teaching English conversational skills to people who are wanting to learn how to improve their English. This is Christian and non-Christian, and the content always had a bit of Christian focus. We'd listen to an article and then discuss it. So two of the guys there, I think, is there a pointer? Yeah. Chan and Ray, they're both non-Christians. And they'd always be asking questions about Christianity through this. So it's a real joy to be able to do this with them. However, because of COVID, we went to online. And so not only the conversational skills you're not improving, but the relational skills are lacking as well. Very hard doing relations online. Very, very difficult. The other thing I was involved with was a program called Celebrate Recovery. It's what it says there, a Christ-centered recovery program. It's a similar vein to Alcoholics Anonymous. It has a similar step kind of process. And it's for people who have basically got what's called hurts, habits and hang-ups, for Khmer people and for expats who are wanting to look through getting closer to Jesus and looking at the sin in their life effectively and wanting to get rid of things which are getting in the way. So I was involved in that program. However, we went to online as well. And so having relationships online is very tricky. It's very easy to gripe and complain, though, about things, and especially COVID. You've probably found that too in your life too. It's easy to complain, and it's easy for people to complain. So I think it's always helpful to look at the things that we're thankful for instead. And there are so many things that we are thankful for in our time overseas. We're thankful that we still love and care for each other as a family. We've been cooped up at home for almost 2 years and we still talk to each other. The kids still like us sometimes, and I love my wife still, which is a miracle after 2 years being cooped up with me. So we're very thankful for that. We've been able to celebrate milestones as a family. Jonathan had his middle school graduation, so he got a gown and did that online as well. And we've been able to just do things as a family where normally we wouldn't have been able to spend so much time together as a family. If it hadn't been COVID, I probably would have been out a lot more and away from the kids. So it's a real lovely time that we've had as a family. We've also been able to make some lovely friends over there too. We've had expat friends, some friends there from Australia who trained with us in Melbourne before we went over, so it's lovely that they were in country with us too. And also other friends as well. We've got Khmer friends and friends from all around the world. In the far right photo, there's a guy there, Roban, who's from Pakistan. So there's people from all around the world in Cambodia where we can relate to and talk to. And also the kids have been making friends too. The kids have got some lovely friends in Cambodia, and it'll be wonderful to go back and for them to see their friends there too. The other thing to be thankful for, they go to a school in Cambodia called Hope Christian School, Hope International School, and it's a school set up about 20 years ago specifically for missionary families. And it's a wonderful school. It's very intentional. They're very aware of the weird situation that children of missionaries are in. And so they very much care for the kids in a loving way. And especially during COVID time too, they were excellent for our kids. They always need teachers though. So if you know of any teacher who is keen for an adventure, who would love to go to Cambodia, they can stay with us, maybe. We'll see. But they always need new teachers over there. And it's such a wonderful service for the missionary community to have teachers come over, serve for a year or two in a school in Cambodia. And the teachers get very well supported too. The school has wonderful systems in place. I thought I'd just finish with those 2 verses again, because I'm very much aware time is up, and thank you for not throwing anything at me, Michael. I thought I'd finish with those 2 verses because, like I said, they are key to why we're over there. So I'll just read them again. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now, friends, this is for the Cambodian people, but it's also for us. It's also for you, as for all believers in Jesus, for people who need to have Jesus in their lives. And I know for people in Cambodia, for us, the last 2 years have been tough, but I know for you as well in New Zealand with everything with COVID and just with life in general. Life is tough, life is hard, and we all need Jesus. Friends, through the difficulties in life, please lean on Jesus. Remember Jesus, because you will find rest for your souls in Christ. It won't change the situation you're in necessarily, but he will always be by your side, and he will never leave you. He will always love you. Like we were saying before, when Mum and Dad died while we were over there, I found so much comfort in knowing that they were Christians and knowing that their hope was in Christ, that they found rest for their souls in Jesus. And I pray and I hope that you do as well. Friends, the Cambodians need Jesus just as we need Jesus, just as your neighbours need Jesus, just as your workmates need Jesus, just as your family needs Jesus. The world needs Jesus. And that leads to the second verse there, doesn't it? How then can they call on the one who they've not believed in? And how can they believe in the one of whom they've not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can anyone preach unless they're sent? Friends, I do want to challenge you this morning too. Just as we are sent to Cambodia, we are in Cambodia serving amongst the Khmer people, amongst the local people, amongst the expats, amongst the people that we're around, just as you guys are called to the people around you too. And everyone needs to know about Jesus. Friends, I don't want you to think that it's the missionary's job to tell people about Jesus. It's everyone's job, because the world needs to know about Jesus, because they will find rest for their souls in him. Sorry, thank you for listening for so long. Let me pray and I'll finish up. Father God, I thank you for Jesus. I thank you that he is the rest that our souls need, that our weary souls often need when we wander away. Father, I thank you for the love that we find in Jesus, for the grace that we find through him, through no matter what we've done, that we can find rest for our souls in him. Please help us, Father, to remember this when life is tough, and help us to remember to share this with other people around us who need to know of the peace and the hope and the joy found only in Jesus, not through anything else. Please give us strength to do this, Father, through your Holy Spirit, work in our lives and prompt us and prod us to do what we need to do to glorify you in all things. Amen.